Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Talks. My name is Toni Austin Allen and I am here with Dr. Roy Austin, author of Definitions for Living, a book dedicated to helping you live more effectively and happily, both personally and in your relationships with others. A number of years ago, Dr. Austin compiled numerous articles which he had written to assist his clients into what is now his book, Definitions for Living, making sense of words and ideas that define our lives. Recently, he and I began sitting at our kitchen table and talking about his book, and we became excited about the possibility of sharing our conversations with others who might benefit from them. The podcast you are about to listen to are the product of the recordings we began making of our conversations. We have discussed the book chapter by chapter and have produced this series of podcasts to accompany the printed version of the book, which is now available as an ebook on various publishing websites. Although we believe you will benefit greatly from the podcasts themselves, you will get the most out of them by purchasing the book, reading each chapter prior to listening to the podcast, and having it available to follow along with our conversations. The ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We hope you enjoy our talks at our kitchen table as much as we have, and that your life will be greatly enriched by having shared our conversations with us.
We are back with Chapter 15, Understanding Motivation. And this is something that I have been interested in pretty much all my life, as a student, as a teacher, in music, and as I read this with you, it just seemed, that's what I have. This has been part of my job,
right?
Forever,
right?
Would you like to just kind of introduce motivation and what that means to you?
You bet. That's a good way to get started, Toni. As I began in the chapter, this chapter is written in the form of a question and answer format. I asked the typical questions related to motivation, and then in the following paragraphs, I sought to answer the question, and then from that came another question which I would answer. So the sections here are question-based, and hopefully that will be helpful. And the first question being, well, naturally, what is motivation?
Yeah.
And I define it, simply stated, motivation is needing or wanting something enough to take action to get it. And so this goes back to the root word of motivation to begin with. And we know the derivatives of that. It would be motivation, could be motive, motion, emotion, anything related to that root word, and it all talks of action, of wanting something or needing something enough to take action to get it. It's what moves us.
There's energy involved.
It's just energy involved to accomplish an outcome. And so it's a very simple concept. It's simply based on all those derivative words indicating movement toward an outcome.
And we're not talking about huge outcomes all the time, because I like what you said. You cannot not be motivated. Everything you do is an attempt to achieve some goal, to get something you believe you need or something you want. And I was immediately, the first thing I thought of was, I am motivated to get out of bed in the morning to make my coffee. I mean, that's what motivates me to get out of bed in the morning. That's good enough.
Absolutely. And of course, the other aspect of motivation, which we'll get to in a minute, it's sort of a balance. Another reason or motivation for us to get out of bed is to think of the unpleasant consequences of staying in bed too long.
Like getting fired from your job.
Yeah, or just getting bored lying there, getting bed sores or whatever you could get if you stayed in bed long enough. And so it's a balance that we'll talk about in a little bit. So we have to be motivated to brush our teeth, to get up and make a sandwich. So all motivation is something that moves us to some form of action. So you cannot not be motivated unless you're dead.
Right.
That's the only way you're not going to be motivated.
Well, I like what you say in the middle of the page. It says, what you do at any given time is simply a reflection, directly or indirectly, of what you value most at that moment. When you can't seem to stay on track towards some goal you believe is a priority, look at your actual behavior.
You always measure motivation. If you want to understand your behavior, don't listen to your thoughts. Listen to your actions. You may think that something is really, really important to you, and you say, oh, I really need to get up and do this, that, or the other, but I just can't make myself do that. I'm wondering why. Well, it's very simple that something else is more important to you than getting up and doing that particular task, or you would do it. It is all a matter of priorities. We can believe that and genuinely believe and know that a number of things are important to us, but we can't equalize those things that are important to us. We have to always set priorities. Like here again, getting out of bed. Part of us wants to stay in bed and snuggle under the covers, and part of us wants the benefits of getting out of bed so that we can enjoy that cup of coffee, or that we can get up and go to our job and get paid a salary so we can pay the rent and go on a vacation. And so it's one of those cases where I mentioned a little bit later in the chapter, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. So you can have several important things at the same time, but we always choose our behavior based on what is most important at that moment.
You say your priorities control and focus your motivation. So that seems like that's kind of a first step. Figure out, what do I want to happen? What is the thing I want to happen the most?
And that's the key phrase, the most. And that explains your behavior. And when you get confused about why am I not motivated to get up and wash the dishes, because I had rather sit here and watch television right now than get up and wash the dishes, even though we know that we should, we need to, part of us wants to have it done before we go to bed, all of that. And you say, well, I just don't understand why I can't make myself do something. It's because something else is more important to you at that moment.
Right. You say, though, that asking yourself why you're doing something or not doing something is not a really good motivator.
Well, it's not a good explanation or not a good way to understand one's behavior. In our culture, which is in many, many ways backwards. That's why things don't work very well, because we're doing most things backwards. And one of the backwards way to understand behavior is to look backwards, is to look in the past.
We say, why am I not motivated to do that? Why am I not doing that? Why do I want to do that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, but instead, it's more important or more useful to ask, what is the most important thing to me right now? And that is determined by your actions, not your words or your shoulds or your ought tos or need tos. I always do what's most important to me at the time. And so if we're looking backwards, there are two fallacies to doing it that way. First of all, we're reared in a culture where we from the day we're born, we're made accountable, so to speak, to other people for our behavior. And so, like a parent may say to a child, why did you eat that cookie when I told you not to, because we're getting ready to have dinner in just a few minutes, and why did you do that? Well, they're usually not at all interested in why we did it, in the sense of...
It's a judgment call, isn't it?
It's a judgment call. It's criticism in disguise. They're not really asking a question. They're making a statement. It's a rhetorical statement, in that they don't know. They know why you had the cookie, because you wanted it.
And the want was a priority.
The want was a priority over waiting till dinner or following the rules. And so it's more of a criticism, and so it sets you up as a child to have to defend yourself, to justify your behavior to other people. And that really gets you into a lot of power struggles. And then another reason why asking the question why is not good is because it reaches back into the past, and behavior is never related to the past. Even the word because is the key word there. Because comes from the word causation. What causes me to do X, Y, or Z? And that's not the motivation for action. And I use the example here, well, I did this because my boss made me angry. So we reach back in the past and say, well, this caused me to do this, but that's not really accurate. Number one, it may make other things or circumstances or people responsible for our behavior, so that we don't have to take responsibility for our own behavior. She made me so mad, or she made me feel guilty, so I did this, that, or the other. Or I didn't have a choice about that, those kinds of things. So we blame others and other circumstances if we look back into the past. And the best way to do it is to say, what am I trying to accomplish, or what am I wanting to happen as a result of doing X, Y, or Z that I'm doing now, or that I'm getting ready to do or thinking about doing. All behavior is future-oriented. It's goal-oriented. So in order to understand your behavior and your motivation toward that behavior, look into the future, not the past.
Well, I've got a question for you, because I know that a lot of people who have had childhood trauma, they often really struggle with motivation. And doesn't that have something to do with the past and how things got wired? Or am I off base there?
No, the principle is still true here. If you dig deeply enough in a therapeutic type setting, most people can't do this on their own. Or even people who have not had extensive trauma in childhood, they still have difficulty digging down into their intentions or their hoped for outcomes in their behavior. And so the abuse from the past does not cause one's behavior in the present. One's behavior in the present basically is to avoid, here, that's what PTSD is all about. It's bringing the future mentally, the past mentally into the present or the future, for fear that the bad things that happened to me as a child are going to happen to me right now in this present moment, or at some point in the future, if I don't do X, Y, or Z, or if I do X, Y, or Z. And so they're still trying to prevent further abuse or pain and suffering by their current behavior. So it's still future oriented. So that's why a lot of PTSD survivors are trying to prevent further abuse or mistreatment or pain and suffering by their current behavior. which is no longer needed, but their brains are trapped into a past that says the past is going to happen in the present moment at this point.
I get it. That totally makes sense.
So they live in a constant state of anxiety, and so their behaviors are attempts to either eliminate their anxiety, the pain and suffering they expect to happen, like if they, like a lot of PTSD people, abuse victims, have a hard time completing projects or carrying through on commitments they have made or goals that they want to accomplish. And that's not because they have been abused in the past. It is so that they can avoid criticism and failure and punishment and shame and ridicule in the same way that they received it as a child. They expect the same thing to happen if they reach out and take a risk that they might fail at. Then they are afraid of that shame and suffering, so they don't do anything. They don't follow through on it out of the fear of what's going to happen if they do. So it's all future oriented. Even though it began in the past, it programmed their brains to do what we call anxiety management control.
Mm-hmm. That totally makes sense. So to sum that part of it up, we really need to look at what we want to accomplish, what our priorities are, and just state those, really contemplate that, and then we're motivated once we figure out what that is.
And the hard time that people have doing that is, number one, they don't know to do it. They haven't learned what you and I are talking about now. But also there is that sense of shame or guilt or that a lot of people feel that if I take the time and the effort to set my priorities, I'm afraid that I will be judged by other people that I have made the wrong priorities. I've chosen the wrong things that are important. So I will keep trying to force myself to do what is not a priority with me, and I go ahead and do what my real priorities are, and then we start finding ways to excuse or justify our priorities by saying, oh, well, I didn't get around to it, or well, I forgot it, or I got sidetracked on this other thing, instead of saying it. Or when someone invites us over for dinner and we don't want to go, that's not a priority for us for some reason or other, and then we say, oh no, I can't do that. I have to get up early in the morning to get to work. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to at all, but we make excuses because we're afraid to say, spending dinner with you is not a priority of mine. That's not something I really want to do. I want to stay home and watch television. And so we make up excuses, say, and the favorite excuse is I didn't have time.
Right.
As long as I don't have time for something, then you won't criticize me for not making a priority of doing what you think I should be doing or what you want me to do.
Right.
So it's a power struggle game there.
Mm-hmm. What really motivates us? You talk about this in the next section, and you'd think it would be a lot of different things, but you bring it down to two things.
Just two things, and this was clarified early on by Sigmund Freud, mm-hmm. when he came up with his magic formula of two motivators, and that's all there are. It is the avoidance of pain and the pursuit of pleasure. So we do something to avoid some discomfort or pain or rejection or failure or harm to ourselves or as we perceive it, or we choose something that brings us pleasure. We get some reward for it. And so those are basically the only two things that motivate us to do anything.
Talk about the idea about how sometimes when you seek a pleasurable goal that there is the risk of discomfort.
Yes, and that's a fact of life that a lot of people really, in their immaturity or lack of education, or denial do not want to have to face, and that is you can't have your cake and eat it too. And this is where I began talking about the two different kinds of balances that we need in our lives between pleasure and pain, because there are old truisms and all kinds of cliches about, you can't have your cake and eat it too, or there's, no pain, no gain, and these kinds of things, or everything costs something, you don't get anything for free in life. Mm-hmm. And all of those are truisms that happen to be true.
Mm-hmm. Well, even in exercise, I've heard people say, I want to look great and I want to be strong, but I don't want the pain. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Then that's not going to happen.
There ain't no free lunches, as the old saying goes. It's another cliche, but there's the truth. And so this is where we have to set our priorities. How much do we value whatever it is we're trying to avoid that's unpleasant to us? And or how much do we want something that will bring us pleasure, or we hope it will bring us pleasure? How much do we want that, to the extent of what I'm willing to pay the price for in order to get it? And so all decisions are based simply on what the business world calls the benefit cost analysis process. And every decision is made either deliberately or subconsciously on that principle. You have to weigh the pros and the cons with every decision you make. You can't get around it.
It is fascinating, though, to look at our American culture and see what people are willing to put up with so that they don't have to have the pain of giving something else up. I'm thinking about the health industry. People are not willing to give up terrible eating habits or lack of exercise or not going to the dentist or the doctor. They're willing to do those things so that they can just keep on doing what they've always done, but they're giving up enormous amounts of good health and longevity.
Yes, basically for comfort.
Yeah.
Many cultures, especially American culture as I see it, does exactly that, but many other cultures around the world do the same thing, is that they will choose comfort over well-being much of the time.
Which brings us right to the next part of this, what motivates us. And you talk about the familiarity versus the novelty. And I think we live in a time of familiarity. People really want to feel safe. They want the familiar.
And then, of course, there's the other extreme of novelty. And that is some parts of our culture, our population wants novelty all the time. And so they won't stick to anything. They get bored real easily. They want to travel all the time. They want to party all the time. They want to meet new people. They can't stay in one relationship very long. They have serial relationships. They're trying new things. And their lives are a mess because there's no familiarity, there's no routine, there's no habits to help make life easier or bring pleasure. So they have the opposite extreme. And it's one philosopher many, many years ago said, in all things, moderation.
Yes.
And that's the key to this chapter, is that you have to balance familiarity with novelty, because both of them are demotivators when carried to extreme. And the best motivators are those activities or that lifestyle that brings some amount of novelty for a while. We like to try new things, travel, see new places, but if we do too much of it, then that gets boring to us, and we get tired of it, and then we want to go back to a routine. Like people want to go on vacation for a while to get away from the routine and the boredom of work-a-day activity. But then after a while on a vacation, oh, I'm ready to go home. I want to go back to, the regular lifestyle. I'm getting tired of traveling around all the time and living out of hotels and suitcases. And so we have to balance novelty and routine to be highly motivated to do both of them. If you overdo either of them, it becomes quickly a demotivator.
Yeah, and I see that in my own life. I mean, we just went on a trip and then had to stay at somebody else's house for a little while, and I was so ready to be home. I just couldn't. But I have dreams of just traveling and traveling and traveling, but I know, just like the RVers who sell their house, they quit their job, and they're planning to RV around the country for the rest of their lives, there's going to be some point when they're going to park that RV and say, let's make it home here.
Yeah, I had a friend who did exactly that.
Yeah.
He and his wife sold everything they had, and when they retired and got rid of all their clothes and their house and all their things that tied them down, and bought an RV and traveled all over the country for a couple of years. And then they wound up coming back to a retirement village out in hot Arizona and bought a little bitty house out there in a retirement center so they could settle down for a while. And then they wanted to get up and go again, and they moved to another town. And so it's that balance between novelty and familiarity that keeps us highly motivated. If you overdo either of them, it becomes a demotivator, because boredom sets in on both ends.
Right, absolutely. And you also talk about another example of that balance between pleasure and pain with the idea of success versus failure. Totally get that. And I saw that as a teacher quite a lot. I had students, if they didn't win all the time or succeed in a performance all the time, it was absolute black and white failure, and it was not acceptable.
And that's a huge demotivator.
Yeah, they didn't want to do piano anymore.
Yeah, and the converse is also true here. If you have too much success, then that's a demotivator too. And this is what a lot of people don't understand, Tony, is that if you always succeed, you never have any failures, then after a while that gets kind of boring if you're pretty well staying within your area of so-called expertise or your skill sets, to the point that you never stretch yourself and challenge yourself with the risk of failure by trying something new and different and more advanced and more challenging, then you're going to get demotivated, because it's not much fun to keep winning all the time and never have to take any risk or do any work for what you get. Then you go, oh, that's not much fun.
Yeah, and I've heard that if you are not failing, then you're not pushing your edge, because you're keeping right there at a place where you can succeed all the time. But that is, again, that place of familiarity, because it's safe.
It's safe and a real demotivator. So either extreme will shut you down.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, they're so afraid of failure that they won't try anything, and that makes life miserable. Or they succeed, or they have everything handed to them on a silver platter, like trust fund kids and all that. They never have to work for it, and they never fail because they don't have to do anything. There's no challenges, and they get bored and go nuts and ruin their lives with constant activity and running around the world when the jet set. And so if you go to either extreme, your life just falls apart. So in all things, moderation is where true motivation works best.
Yeah, and so you have a little diagram here, and it really is about balance. I think that balance seems to be the best place to be, that middle way. Just stay close to the middle and you'll be okay. Those pendulum swings, one or the other, or trying to stay in one or the other.
Yeah, because
isn't healthy, is it?
No, it's not healthy at all. But the balance is the healthy part, because we're all subject to the law of physics, And as we know, one of the laws of physics is that for every action there is an opposite and equal reaction. So if you have too much success, it's eventually going to wind up in a whole lot of failure. Mm-hmm. And if you have too much failure, it's going to wind up in a whole lot of fear of trying anything new, and your life's going to fall apart there either, because you won't take any chances or risk because you're afraid of failure. And so your life's going to fall apart there as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I really have a lot of compassion for people who are in the limelight all the time, politicians and celebrities, actors, Hollywood people. I mean, it must be very, very stressful to be expected to succeed all the time. We know they don't, but that's why there is so much pendulum swing in many of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And everyone knows the old adage is that most people who are highly successful and popular and have a lot of fame, their lives just fall apart. And the old adage is, he or she just couldn't handle success. Mm-hmm. They can't handle fame. And it's true. Too much success is a recipe for ultimate failure.
Yes, and then when they do fail, you're dropping big. You're having a big plummet.
That's that equal and opposite reaction. And the people who fail so much, obviously, like the people who aspire to fame and success and fortune, and if they keep failing, then they become hopeless and just give up. Mm-hmm. So because they've set their goals too high, too lofty, too impossible, and so they see themselves as failures because they haven't built in enough opportunities for success, so they just give up trying anything. So here again, balance is the magic key.
Well, let's go to the next section. It says, how else can I stay motivated? And you've got some bullet points here. May I read them?
Yes, please.
Okay. If I can't have everything I need and want.
Well, to start back and set the stage for it by reading the paragraphs just above it, because that really explains these 3 bullet points.
Oh, of course. When we try to satisfy at least 2 opposing needs or desires, we become frustrated and our motivation becomes scattered and weakened. We cannot satisfy all our needs at the same time. As the old saying goes, we cannot have our cake and eat it too. But we often interpret this simple fact of life as a threat. Before I read those bullet points, just say a little bit about this, about the opposing needs and desires. Can you just say something about that? Are you talking about, like when you said, I gave the example earlier about exercise. I want to be strong and fit, but I don't want the pain. There's your 2 opposites.
I don't want to have to pay the price for it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about you want to be motivated in that, but you get scattered and weakened because you don't know what to do at that point. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, the scattered and weakened are sort of frozen in your tracks, not and being confused about, where do I spend my time and energy? It's based on what you're getting ready to read, because of these 3 myths, these 3 beliefs about this fact of life. I can't have my cake and eat it too, but I should be able to, or I should be, and if I'm not able to have it all, then something's wrong with me. I'm a failure. And these are the 3 ways that people interpret it in their brain, even though they may not be consciously aware of it.
I see. Okay. If I can't have everything I need and want, I am a failure, and bad things happen to failures. The second one is, if I don't succeed at everything I try, I am weak and dangerous. Things happen to weak people. All my wants are actually needs which I cannot do without, so I am obviously in trouble if I can't have it all. If I am forced to choose between 2 options, I might choose the wrong one, and bad things happen to people who make wrong choices. boy, there are some stories going on here. I mean, my goodness. And it's a lot of black and white thinking.
Yes, it is. And we talked about that in a previous discussion that we had on one of the earlier chapters about how to make right decisions. Mm-hmm. And this had, well, take for instance a man or a woman who might want to be highly successful in their careers, get a lot of recognition, success, money, prestige, positions, degrees, and at the same time they want to have a real happy home life. They want to be great parents, and they want to be active in their community, and they're trying to have it all, and that's not possible. You can't no more than you can be all things to all people. You can't be all things to yourself as well. Mm-hmm. And so they have a hard time making priority choices, and so they think that if I can't do my best in all these areas, I'm a failure. And that's what it boils down to. All three of these, as you notice, it says bad things happen when.
Right.
And that's a myth. Bad things don't happen to people who live the so-called average successful life. That was that chapter on understanding mediocrity, the joy of mediocrity. And this is people who cannot enjoy being average because of the myth of perfectionism.
Right. And that paralyzes you, and so you're not going to really go anywhere. You're going to be kind of stuck right there.
Or you try to go everywhere at once, and this is where you get scattered. You spread yourself too thinly, and you burn out, and you don't do well at anything eventually. Because there's only so much time, energy, and money that people have to spend in life, and that's the only three commodities that we have to work with: time, energy, and money. And there's just so much for most people, the average person, there's just so much time, energy, and money that they have.
Right.
Some people have a limitless amount of money. Here again, the trust fund kid idea. But the other two, time and energy, everybody has only just so much. And if you spread it too thin, you're going to be a failure at most everything you attempt. Or at least you're going to perceive yourself as a failure.
Yeah, and that's when you have got to set your priorities.
That's right, and that's the tough one, because that last one says, well, maybe if I choose my priorities, well, it might not be the right one,
right.
So I don't want to have to choose. It's in a lot of religious people or people who seek to be religious have the same problem in that area of spirituality. They don't know what to believe, because what if I choose to believe something that might not be right? And if I die and find out that I made the wrong choice, I'm in deep trouble, because I can't go back and do it over again, unless you believe in reincarnation, and then you have another chance to do it all over again. But a lot of people say, well, if I can't decide what to believe because it might be the wrong thing, I just won't believe in anything. Well, that might be wrong too. And so they live in constant frustration and fear and anxiety because they're so hell-bent, literally, to trying to be heaven-bent. And so they live lives of frustration and the fear because they're afraid to make a choice and live with it and not worry too much about the outcome.
Right. Let's talk about motivating others. Can we motivate people?
No.
Well, that's a short answer, isn't it?
And that's the way I presented it in the chapter. The first word is no. All motivation comes from within. I can't motivate you, and you can't motivate me. And I was thinking a little bit earlier about how to test that. You say, oh, Roy, that's not right. That's not true. We hear about all these motivation speakers and all that. They're getting up and they're motivating everybody, and everybody is so happy and they're all motivated. And it's a myth. You can't motivate anybody. And if you want to try it, get one person to start with and decide you want to motivate that person to do something. And then just have at it and see how it works. And if you try enough things, you're going to find that some people will do what you're trying to get them to do, and you try to get them to do something else through some sort of motivational techniques, and they're not going to do it. And you wonder, oh, how did I fail? You know, I should be able to motivate, which means to control other people's behavior and choices. And if you want to complicate that a little bit more, get 2 or more people, or 2,000 or more people, and try to motivate them and to prove that you can make someone do what you want them to do. Good luck with that. People have tried that for ever since humans existed, and the simple truth is that's not possible. If you don't believe me, try it and see.
I did. I spent my entire career trying to do that, and you're exactly right. And it wasn't until my last year of teaching when I stopped trying to motivate everybody and just decided to live it instead and take each person as they came to me and do a lot of acceptance, that then they all started to thrive. And it was a huge lesson.
Yeah, it's a huge shift in your teaching style too.
Yeah.
And lessened a lot of anxiety and took a lot of burden of responsibility off of your shoulders.
Too bad it was my last year of teaching. But yes, and I would watch that because I was always very motivated by incentives. I loved winning prizes and trophies and things like that in music. And I couldn't understand when I would have students that just didn't care, you know? Or, you know, I would get motivated by getting a little tiny piece of penny candy at the end of my lesson, even when I was 15 and 16 years old.
Yeah.
And I would buy little things like that. And of course, this was decades later when kids had money, you know, and they could buy what they wanted. It was like, I don't care about that.
Right.
You know, what motivated me was not the same as what motivated them. They were wanting smartphones.
Exactly. Which brings us to the whole concept of, because you introduced the word of incentives, we can provide incentives for people, but that's not motivating them. That is offering them some form, here again, of reward and punishment, if we want to call it that, pain or pleasure, in hopes that it will appeal to what does motivate them inside their brains. So we have to get to know the person, experiment, trial and error approaches of offering incentives of either pleasure or pain, and then see if that happens to pique their interest or threaten them enough or bribe them enough to do what you want them to do or what they want to do. So you cannot motivate someone, but you can provide incentives that will assist them on occasion to accomplish whatever you want them to do or whatever they want to do, and you just happen to have a good fit there. What I'm offering you is what you want to have or what you don't want to have happen to you, but you have to experiment with that. But that still doesn't mean you have any control over their behavior, because they have the ultimate decision on what's going to cause them to do one thing or another.
And the punitive incentive is quite risky. I've tried it in my own teaching. When you tried everything else, I know that I would try, like Thomas Edison, it took him 1,000 times to get the light bulb. I would try as many different ways as I could, but I always noticed that when you did a more punitive pain incentive, it was a risky thing to do.
It usually, if it does work, it's usually short term. It's not a pleasant experience, and it almost always damages the relationship in some way. And our society has come up with this crime and punishment idea of so-called justice system. And we create the incentive of pain if people break the law, if you break the law, you go to jail, you pay a fine, or up to and including killing you in order to get you, hopefully, to follow the law. And we know that that works well for a lot of people, but for a significant percentage of the population, it doesn't work well, which just proves that we don't control other people's behavior by either pain or punishment. They all make their own choices, and all we can do is experiment with incentives and see what floats their boat.
And we have to remember that our expectations are usually not what someone else's expectations are for themselves.
That's right. And if you don't know the person really, really well, and they're not cooperative with you and working with you as a team for you to provide the incentives that they are motivated by, then you hit up against a brick wall, or it's just a lot of wasted energy if you do not work with this other person as a team member, rather than just assuming what will motivate them, and then you provide the incentive that you think should work and it doesn't work, and you go, oh, well, why didn't that work? I thought sure it would. Or just the opposite is that you happen to provide an incentive that they are motivated by, and then you say, oh, see, I do have control over this other person. See, I can read their mind and know what works. So, Roy, you're wrong. I can motivate other people.
Try to do that with 200 people in a row.
Yeah, try to do that with how many people is that going to work with? Not very many. Sometimes you get lucky. Most of the time, it's not going to work at all.
Yeah, and so that's why it's really important to get to know those people, to get feedback. If you're being asked to give them something, to be of service, to teach them something, really get feedback and expect that cookie cutter formulas, which I know a lot of people do in their therapy and in their lessons, in their classes, is a real cookie cutter approach. I think that's, the military knows this. They have a cookie cutter way of doing it, and they have to use the pain. Usually, they have other incentives too, but usually it's pain because they need to get everybody on the same page.
And the business world is particularly guilty of this idea of the cookie cutter approach. You hear so many people, companies who say we will set quotas of sales for our salespeople. And they expect that if we set the quotas with the adjoining rewards for that, or the threat of getting fired if you don't meet these quotas, that's going to work. And for some people it works, but for some of their employees it doesn't work at all. When you set quotas for other people to achieve, they don't have a personal investment in that. So some of them are motivated by the money that comes, and some of them are motivated by the threat of getting fired, and some of them not motivated at all, regardless of what the quotas are. So you don't have any really control in the business world either.
So when is it appropriate to try to use incentives to get people to motivate themselves? Because I know that it's a real tricky thing. You don't want to overstep your limits, because that's where we go back to the first chapter of acceptance with a lot of things, because it's very easy to want people to be and do the things you want them to do and be the way you want them to be. And it's not always appropriate.
And this is why we come to this, of course you set me up here for this next question: when is it appropriate to provide incentives? And there are 4 examples when I believe it is appropriate to set incentives. And I can read one and then you can read the other. It's okay. I think it'd be easier just to read them than to try to paraphrase them.
Okay.
If it's okay, and I'll read the first one. Describe below are a few examples of what you might appropriately provide incentives to others. The first one is when people tell you that they have set a goal for themselves, but they're finding it hard to stay motivated. You may offer them rewards for their efforts. Sometimes people need and want your involvement in such matters because they lack the age, the maturity, or creative resources to think of or provide incentives for themselves. Like, for instance, this is particularly true in the case of children. Children don't have the age or maturity to be self-motivated, and so you have to train them how to do that by doing it for them for a while until they get old enough to do it for themselves. And so that's why teachers and parents have stickers and candy bars and toys that they buy because for them if they accomplish certain tasks, because they need to be trained and helped on how to be motivated.
And that's probably why life coaches are so big these days. Adults sometimes get in this quagmire, and especially when they need to change, they need a transformation in their life, and they need somebody to kind of come in and step in and not motivate them, but to give inspiration and incentives.
Oh, absolutely. All right, and the second one?
When you believe that a change in people's behavior would be beneficial to them, but they don't yet see how it would be helpful, you may offer some incentive to entice them to do it anyway so they can later experience the benefits for themselves. That seems like a little bit of a dangerous one, only because I've tried that with people before, and it can get you in trouble if you're not careful.
It's risky.
Yeah.
Because you do not know how any given individual is going to react when you provide them rewards or punishments, so to speak, in order to get them, hopefully, to do something that they don't want to do or don't see the value of it. It could damage the relationship, and you may or may not be on target.
Yeah.
You may or may not be right about that.
Or you're just stepping into their street, their life, and that might really be offensive.
So you really have to think very carefully about that second one, so that you don't impulsively do that without thinking it through. Just because you say, "Oh, well, they'll thank me later for it."
Yeah.
They may or may not.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to risk the relationship in order for you to sort of take charge of their lives like that.
Yeah.
The third one is, when you want others to please you, even though they don't wish to, you can provide incentives so long as you understand that the quality of the relationship may be at risk if you become too coercive toward them. You can try to get someone to do something that they don't want to do, and it may or may not work out to your benefit, and it certainly may or may not work out to the benefit of the relationship itself. They may hold some grudges or resentment toward you, and it could destroy a relationship. So you have to be, here again, very thoughtful and careful, and be willing to take a risk if you're going to put those carrots of pleasure or pain out in front of someone to get them to please you. You can do it, but you do it at your own risk.
We've seen that in sitcoms, that the in-laws who live next door or are coming to visit, and they want everybody to please them, and it causes a lot of problems and laughs, but it's not funny.
No, it may work for a few laughs on a sitcom, but in real life, it can be pretty costly.
Yeah. And the last one, when your work requires that you supervise other employees and their personal motivation alone is not adequate for effective job performance, you will need to provide the necessary incentives to hopefully improve their output at work. Of course, you must be guided by company policy when you use incentives in the workplace.
Yeah, and that's just a fact of life in the business world, is that you have to provide incentives for employees to do jobs that they don't particularly want to do for their own personal pleasure, which is most of the time. They're doing it for money, so you have to provide money or incentives and bonuses and other perks, medical insurance and sick time off and all that. Those are all incentives that you have to provide for people to get them to do stuff that most people don't want to do. Most people would not go to work at their jobs if they didn't have to.
Yeah.
So that's just part of real life.
I cannot tell you how many, and particularly fathers, would come to me with their students in my studio, with their children in my studio, and the fathers would say, I don't think you need to be doing all these incentives. I want my child to learn piano because they have a passion for it. And when they have a passion for it, then I'm going to really get them a real piano. And I'm going, are you joking? I mean, would you go to work, get in your car, go through traffic, and get to the office if you didn't get a bonus? You know, if you didn't get a raise from time to time, if you didn't get some accolades? That's ridiculous.
Of course.
Children are...
They're people too.
They're people too.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous.
Exactly. Incentives are required to get people to do what they don't want to do.
That's right. And when it comes to having to do the same thing day in, day out, all the time, you're just not going to be motivated all the time.
Oh, of course not. So, in conclusion...
I'll read that. I'll read the whole paragraph if that's okay.
You bet.
Okay. Remember the following principle when you want to help others reach their goals. Never overestimate your power and never underestimate your influence. Although you do not have the power to motivate others, you may have a great deal of influence in helping them motivate themselves. People often need role models, someone to believe in them, to encourage them and to guide them in how to stay focused on and committed to their goals. By practicing the principle discussed above, the need for balance between pleasure and discomfort, you can keep yourself motivated toward worthy goals. By so doing, you benefit not only yourself, but others who respect you and wish to learn from your experience. Yeah. That just totally makes sense.
Good. Motivation is very, very simple to understand. It's a balance between pain and pleasure. And it's recognizing that you may have, hopefully, positive influence in someone's life, even though you have to know and admit and work with the fact that you don't have power over their lives. And those two principles are the sum of what this chapter is all about.
Yeah, it's very good, very good. We'll be starting up next with Chapter 16, Negotiation Skills. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. Again, Dr. Austin's ebook is available on Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble, Scribe, Booktopia, Apple Books, Layman's, and Adlibris. We look forward to having you join us for our next podcast.